What is up, everyone? Welcome back to another episode of the Fantasy Fellowship. My name is Kyle. Tonight, June 18th, we're going to be hanging out on a Tuesday here, just going over the 2024 Washington Commanders. We're going to look at their projections. This is the 8th video in my 2024 projection series. I've already covered the entire AFC East. We're finishing up the NFC East tonight, and then I think I'll be on to the North Division. So we'll go to the AFC North and the NFC North next. I'm going to continue to keep pumping these videos out, so continue to watch for them. Let's hop into a screen share here, and we'll kind of do some housekeeping before we get into the video. But you guys can check out the playlist. I'm going to probably link the playlist in the comment section if you guys want to check it out. Again, I've already covered 7 teams here, finishing up with the NFC East in this video here, but check those videos out. I'm giving each team about 15-20 minutes of my time and just sharing these preliminary projections. And then, hey, if you're at all interested in becoming a Fantasy Fellowship member, it's $10 a month. Get access to the private Discord link, which will be, throughout the rest of the season. You got my projections. I understand you're probably going to want these more towards August, but if you do want to check them out and get a head start and peek at some things, you can always look at the projections. I got advanced data studies. I have dynasty content, rookie and dynasty rankings, among best ball content as well. So a lot of stuff there. I'm going to continue to post stuff there all summer. But let's get to the main idea of the video, the 2024 Washington Commanders. And the way that I've been doing these videos is I've been kind of doing a 2023 review to kind of set the stage for 2024. And the Washington Commanders are one of those few teams that did, clean house. They got a brand new head coach, a brand new offensive coordinator, a brand new starting quarterback, got a couple brand new pieces on offense as well to play with. So this is a really fun team to project. And it's a team that I think finally has made some correct decisions, and I think we're going to like what we see out of the Commanders going forward. But a 2023 recap right here. The Commanders were okay offensively. They really struggled defensively. That's where they needed the most help. But Ron Rivera just kind of grew stale there. Eric Bieniemy kind of fizzled out as an offensive coordinator. Maybe I wonder if that was just Kansas City and Andy Reid, kind of doing a lot of propping him up. But either way, you had a ton of passing attempts last year out of the Commanders. 636 passing attempts. They threw about 64% completion percentage, almost 4,200 yards, about 6.6 yards per attempt, 24 passing touchdowns and 21 interceptions. They ran the ball not much, like 359 rushing attempts on the season. That's very low. That might have been one of the lowest among the league last year for about 600 yards. 14 rushing touchdowns, eight total fumbles. It was just a wild and kind of unpredictable year. They only won 4 games. That defense and that secondary was so bad they couldn't really establish the run, and they relied heavily on Sam Howell. The man threw 612 passing attempts last year, a 21-21 touchdown interception season. He did run the ball well as a quarterback. 5 rushing touchdowns was nice, but overall, he just couldn't get anything established with Brian Robinson and Antonio Gibson, despite them running 4 yards per carry. I did like what Terry McLaurin did last year. He continues to just churn out 1,000-yard seasons with kind of junk. He's had 3 straight 1,000-yard seasons. Actually, 4 straight, my bad. 4 straight 1,000-yard seasons. And his quarterbacks have been Alex Smith, Dwayne Haskins, Taylor Heineke, Carson Wentz, Sam Howell. Like, it's been pretty crazy. And I think we're going to like what we see from Terry McLaurin. But overall, the offense moved the ball. I think they actually improved as an offense last year. They just didn't get to run a lot of plays. They kind of slowed down the offense, and they had to throw the ball a ton. So a little bit out of whack. I'm glad that they were able to reset and try something new here. And that's pretty much it. I think the 2023 recap for them doesn't really matter as much because they trimmed all the fat. They got rid of They got rid of Rivera. They got rid of Bieniemy. They got rid of Sam Howell. They got rid of Jacoby Brissett. And we're looking at a new look offense this season. So let's get into it. Let's start with the quarterbacks here. Jayden Daniels, the rookie quarterback out of LSU, super electric. And I just want to note that, in the data study that I did, if you're a member on the Fantasy Fellowship, you guys should check out the members only content tab. And if you go look at the where did I put that? I have an advanced data study, the Dynasty Rookie Guide. It's full of stats basically from this previous rookie class. And Jayden Daniels, I mean, he put up the best quarterback fantasy season last year out of anybody I've studied in the last 5-6 years. He beat Joe Burrow's amazing LSU season. Like, the dude's very productive with his legs. He's also a pretty dang good passer. I know a lot of people don't really want to believe that he can pass, but he fed Malik Neighbors. He fed Brian Thomas Jr. He had a really nice season last year for LSU. And I have him, being above average as a rookie here. I have him at 475 passing attempts, which is among one of the lowest in the league. But I have him just under 63%. I have him about 3,400 yards, 17 touchdowns, 9 interceptions. That's almost a double, touchdown interception ratio. And then I do have him running the ball a lot, about 145 rushing attempts, 735 rushing yards, 7 rushing touchdowns, and 2 fumbles. And I kind of have him starting, 14, 15 games. So if you think about that, that's, 8, 9, 10 attempts rushing per game, a good chance at a touchdown a passing touchdown every game. And then, if he can have basically a rushing touchdown, about 200 passing yards. And then if he adds that, that 40, 50 yards rushing and a 50% chance at a touchdown, he's going to be a very, very good fantasy quarterback. So I'm very much interested in Jayden Daniels. I think he's going to be one of the better options when you get late in the draft and say, hey, especially if you're in a 10-man league, just wait for quarterback. Take Jayden Daniels and Trevor Lawrence. Take Jayden Daniels and Jordan Love. Wait for those guys that are sitting 10, 11, 12, 13th in that range, and you can have a hell of a QB duo that you can kind of just start matchups in. And who knows, maybe he gets off to a hot start after week 1. Remember Anthony Richardson last year? Like, we were so enamored with what he could do as a rusher. We were starting him right after week 1. He was so good. And I think Jayden Daniels can do that, because if he's adding, if you give him 40 yards a game, that's 4 points there, and 50% chance at a rushing touchdown, that's an additional 3 points per game. He's adding 7 to 8 fantasy points just from rushing alone per game. Anything he throws for is on top. So if he does get 200 yards and a touchdown, that's what? 200 yards is 8 points. And then a touchdown, 4 point. Like, you're looking at a 20-point floor out of Jayden Daniels almost off the bat. And that's just an okay game from him. A great game is going to look like 30 to 40 points. So I'm super excited about Jayden Daniels in the games where he does throw for, say, north of almost 300 yards and 2-3 touchdowns. He's going to have some rushing stats to go with that, and he's just going to smash. So I'm 100% behind Jayden Daniels. He was one of my most drafted guys in best ball in the early draft, and I got a very good discount on him, because now he's going around, a top 10, top 12 QB. Where I have him ranked right now, I do have him ranked as my QB 12, which feels really, really good. He's going ahead of guys like Jared Goff, Tua, Brock Purdy, Herbert, established veteran quarterbacks. And I think Jayden Daniels does have that top 10, top 12 QB1 upside this season. And I like the situation. I think bringing in Cliff Kingsbury, we saw him work well with Kyler Murray. They might not have, won a lot of games and been a big playoff threat, but the offense did put up yards and stats and numbers and things like that. So I think there's a lot here with Jayden Daniels, and I'm pretty excited about it. They did bring in Marcus Mariota, and again, I only projected him for maybe 2 games. I don't care about Marcus Mariota. If he's in, we're not going to be using him for fantasy. It's all about Jayden Daniels here. But I think Washington got it right. They got the new owner. They got the future QB1. And hopefully Jayden Daniels is a really big hit. I think he's somewhere, between Kyler Murray, that's probably his average outcome, is that he's as good as Kyler Murray, who can run the ball and throw the ball pretty well. He's maybe not as good of a passer as Kyler Murray. He's probably more of like a Lamar Jackson type passer. So I think the rushing ability, though, is very strong. And any rushing quarterback like him, if he's going to play 15, 16 games, and with his rushing upside of 8 to 9, 10 carries per game, the dude's going to put up fantasy numbers. So don't be afraid of Jayden Daniels as your QB1 in redraft leagues this season. But that's it for quarterback. Let's look at the running backs. And I really like this running back group. You got Austin Ekeler, Brian Robinson, Chris Rodriguez Jr., and then some castaways here, Jeremy McNichols and Michael Wiley, who Michael Wiley popped in my data study for rookies. But it's a really good group. Austin Ekeler and Brian Robinson are going to be the guys at the top. I fully expect Brian Robinson to lead this team in carries. I have him at 205 rushing attempts, 865 yards, about 4.22 yards per carry, 6 rushing touchdowns. And then I think his receiving workload is going to drop significantly. One, because Jayden Daniels is quarterback. He's a running quarterback. He doesn't really look for the outlet as much. He did support a healthy season from Rachaad White, though, back at Arizona State. I think White had something like 40 or 45 targets in that season, or maybe receptions in that season. So he can throw to the running back, but I just think bringing in Austin Ekeler, he's a receiving specialist, that's going to take a lot off Brian Robinson's plate. So he did have 43 targets last year. I have that coming down almost in half, about 20 targets, 15 receptions, about 105 yards. And he did catch 4 touchdowns last year, which was a lot. So he was very, very good after the catch. So I might be a little bit light on his receiving workload, but I just think as long as Ekeler is healthy, he's going to be the guy out there in every 2-minute situation, every third down. He's going to be running a lot of routes for this team. I have him at about 115 rushing attempts, 505 yards, 3 rushing touchdowns, a fumble, and then I do have him at 45 receptions, 60 targets, 365 yards, and 2 touchdowns. I think he's going to be one of Jayden Daniels' most trusted targets. When he drops back to pass, he's looking for Terry, scans to Dotson, and then he probably dumps off to Austin Ekeler right away. He's probably a 2-target read, and then he looks for Ekeler in the flat or in the middle of the field, wherever he may be. And I think he's going to soak up a lot of targets. So I do think Ekeler, last year, he left a bad taste in our mouth. And being a former first-round pick, he got that early ankle sprain, and the Chargers, man, they just had nothing else going for them. So they really struggled as a team. Ekeler played injured. I'm willing to kind of chalk that up and just say, hey, like, he's still a really, really good receiving threat. I think when you're looking for running back targets and things, especially in a full PPR league, like Ekeler, he can be your RB2 man, and he's super cheap. I think he can be a really nice surprise this season. And then after that, I do like Chris Rodriguez. He came on late at the end of last year. He was actually taking away carries from Antonio Gibson. If anything were to happen to Brian Robinson, I think Chris Rodriguez would be the primary ball carrier, and he just takes Brian Robinson's place. I don't know if that puts more on Eckler's plate necessarily, but I do want to say if anything happens to Brian Robinson or Ekeler, we'll be looking for Chris Rodriguez. And then I just think Jeremy McNichols and Michael Wiley, these guys are either practice squad type players or, not active running backs. So probably keep 3 RBs active, but keep an eye on Michael Wiley. I just want to say he's a really good receiving back. He could be a guy that, if Ekeler goes down, he could be the receiving back in this offense if needed. So I like the running back group. I think they're going to get a lot of production, but it's definitely a committee. You're going to see Brian Robinson run the ball. You're going to see Austin Ekeler catch the ball and kind of sprinkles of, in between. But let's see where I have each running back ranked in full PPR this season. So in full PPR, I do have Austin Ekeler down here at RB33. He's basically a flex running back graded for me. But the way I view this is, hey, he's RB33 in my projections. I think he's going to be serviceable as a running back too, because, hey, there's 32 running backs that I have ahead of him. 8 of those guys are going to get hurt, miss time, whatever. He could be a top 24, top 20 running back. And if he runs hot with touchdowns, I only have him projected for 5 touchdowns. If he runs hot with touchdowns and gets up to 8, 9, 10, then he's a for sure top 15, 16 running back. So I like him quite a bit. And then Brian Robinson, I have right there at RB35. So for me, I love 0 running back builds this year. I like taking running backs in that 8th, 9th, 10th round. And that's where BRob and Ekeler are going. And if you like easy touches, you like a guy that's going to have a high floor, both guys can do the same thing. I think Brian Robinson's probably looking at 12 to 16 touches per game. Ekeler probably more in that 10 to 12 touches per game, but the PPR weighs a lot for Ekeler. So I like both guys quite a bit. But that's it for running back. We'll move on to the wide receiver position, and that is led by Terry McLaurin, Jahan Dotson. They drafted Luke McCaffrey, who is a sibling of Christian McCaffrey. He actually has played a lot of different positions at college, but he settles on receiver here. But I think he can do some running the ball and things like that. There have been some reports of him moving around and getting carries and things like that in the offense. And then after that, you have Diami Brown, who's been there for a while, Olamide Zaccheaus, and Dax Milne. But we're just going to focus on the top 4 guys. I think those guys are kind of locked into the top 4. It's Terry McLaurin, man. I think the fact that he's been, 3 or 4 straight 1,000-yard seasons with the quarterbacks that I listed before, Alex Smith, Taylor Heineke, Sam Howell, Carson Wentz, there's just been a bunch of junk here. And you could argue that Jayden Daniels is the best quarterback that he's played with. And I know he's going to be less accurate, than we want. But he's going to feed his number one target. He fed Brian Thomas Jr. and Malik Neighbors last year. He's like, McLaurin's going to be fine. And I actually think that I'm too low on targets for Terry McLaurin. I have Terry at 5 targets or 5 running attempts, 20 yards or 25 yards rushing, but 72 receptions, 125 targets, a little over 1,000 yards and 5 touchdowns. And that's just kind of like his average production. Like if he runs hot, sure, he could have a career high. The dude's career high in touchdowns is 5. Like he could easily set that this season with Jayden Daniels. So I wouldn't be surprised if he runs hot and gets 7, 8, 9 touchdowns, goes for 1,200 yards and flirts with 80, 90 receptions. He's got that in him. He's a very, very good receiver. So I like getting Terry McLaurin quite a bit. He looks great as your wide receiver 3. He's going in the 4th round of best balls right now. He looks really good on your roster, and I'm pretty happy to do so. And then after that, like, are we going to get rookie year Jahan Dotson, where he was running really, really well and catching touchdowns and things like that? He kind of got phased out of the offense last year for some reason. I don't know if Sam Howell just couldn't get on page with him, or if it was, the offensive schemes and things like that. I still believe in Jahan Dotson. I don't know if he's ever going to be, like a wide receiver 2 or 3 in fantasy football, but I do think he has wide receiver 3 flex potential this year. And he's going to be the wide receiver 2. He's going to be locked into 2 wide receiver sets, hopefully. He's going to be out there on the field. I have him soaking up 100 targets, 61 catches, 725 yards, and 4 touchdowns. And honestly, I think he can do a lot more. Because if Jayden Daniels comes, like if I'm low on my passing attempts and he's only got, I have the Commanders at 520 passing attempts, which is very, very low. If they go over that, McLaurin and Dotson, that means they're catching a lot more passes. So I do think Dotson has a spot for you on your bench. He's one of the sleepers in redraft leagues. He could come out week 1 and catch, 7 passes for 82 yards and a touchdown, and I won't be surprised. So we'll watch him in training camp and see how he's working with Jahan Dotson and the ones. After that, you have Luke McCaffrey, who is the favorite to be the starting slot receiver in 3 wide receiver sets. I do think Cliff Kingsbury is going to primarily run a lot of 3 wide receiver sets. So I'm interested in McCaffrey, especially in best ball. I don't think for redraft leagues we're going to care too much, but in best ball, yes. I have him at 40 receptions, 65 targets, 425 yards, and 2 TDs. And then Diami Brown's kind of the 4th receiver deep threat. I have him at 18 receptions, 35 targets, 265 yards, and a touchdown. After that, we'll see Zacchaeus and Dax Milne, they'll get snaps here and there, but I don't really think they're anything to note. So I'm drafting Terry McLaurin heavily. I like sleeper picks on Jahan Dotson, and then best ball, give me Luke McCaffrey there, especially when I'm building out Commanders builds. For receiver projections, I do have Terry McLaurin down here at wide receiver 32. I think he's in that Amari Cooper, Michael Pittman, even Zay Flowers kind of range where, you can get these guys as your wide receiver 3, and they can easily be a top 20 wide receiver this season. So I like the value on Terry. Jahan Dotson I have down here at wide receiver 60. So he's kind of like a borderline wide receiver 5, where he's probably a guy on your bench. But I wouldn't be surprised, if there's weeks where you're going to want to start him, especially if he's rolling and he's the clear number 2 target. And then Luke McCaffrey will just be a bench piece. But overall, I like the receiver group. They do need maybe one more guy here, but I think they're strong enough for Jayden Daniels to succeed right away. We'll finish here with the tight ends. You got Zach Ertz, Ben Sinnott, and John Bates. They drafted Sinnott as the 2nd tight end off the board. There was a lot of steam about him being the number 2 tight end leading up to the draft, and I'm glad they drafted him because I was very, very high on him, and I did get a lot of him over on Underdog before his ADP shot up. But I think it's going to be Zach Ertz as the starting tight end for week 1. And as long as he can hold on to the job and stay healthy, I think Zach Ertz is going to be a part of this offense. He's going to run a lot of short, 6 to 9 yard routes. He's going to be a low ADOT guy, Jayden Daniels outlet kind of thing. And I think he's going to soak up and be a nice teacher for Sinnott. So I have Ertz leading the way at tight end, 38 receptions, 55 targets, 405 yards, and 3 TDs. I do think Ben Sinnott could be a guy that takes over as the year goes on. But, he's basically a fullback converted into tight end. So I think there's going to be a big learning curve for him to lock himself in and be a fantasy asset. So I'm not really drafting him a ton in best balls right now. But for dynasty leagues, I am excited. He's got a lot of tools that you like to look for in a tight end. but I think his best football is ahead of him yet. He's behind Zach Ertz for this season. As long as Ertz is healthy, he's going to be in the way. So I have Sanat, 22 receptions, 35 targets, 245 yards, and 2 TDs. We'll see how those guys go. But I like what the Washington Commanders have done. We'll finish with a 2024 kind of recap here from fantasy perspective. But I do think Zach Ertz has low end. If you go 0 tight end, I grab him a lot, round 20 of best balls right now. I don't find myself drafting a lot of Sanat unless it's on Underdog or DraftKings, but he might be the starting tight end by week 15, 16, 17. We'll see. But I think a healthy Zach Ertz still has a little bit juice left to squeeze, and he should be useful. We'll kind of review here the tight ends. I have Zach Ertz, tight end number 28. And it looks like Ben Sanat, tight end 39. So not drafting a ton of these guys. I'd rather, if I'm drafting from this offense, I want Terry McLaurin, I want Jayden Daniels, and I want Ekeler and Brian Robinson. Those are the guys that I feel good about potentially starting in my lineup every week. Again, I have Terry McLaurin, wide receiver 32. Dotson's just a bench piece. But I do think there's going to be a lot of ping-ponging back and forth where it's a Brian Robinson game or it's an Austin Ekeler game, just based on, who they're playing and what the situation is. I think both running backs can be drafted. And on a site like Drafters, where it's a season-long accumulation of fantasy points, I find myself trying to get Ekeler and Brian Robinson on the same team because I'm just locking in a running back 2 every week. And then I do have Jayden Daniels as my quarterback 12. But hey, that's it for the Washington Commanders 2024. I'm cautiously optimistic. I still think, they're a year or 2 away. It wouldn't surprise me if they did win 6, 7, 8 games this year. I think that's probably where they're going to be. But the NFC East, man, it's got some turnover potentially in it. You have the Cowboys and the Eagles at the top. The Giants are getting better. The Commanders are getting better. Maybe in 2025, we're talking about the Commanders as being a sleeper team to win this division. So I like what they got going on. It feels like they have a solid foundation going forward. So I'm, again, cautiously optimistic. But hey, thank you so much for your time for watching these videos. I'm going to probably put some videos here in the corners after this. So check out those. Check out the playlist. Continue watching the stuff. And I'll keep doing best ball drafts. And we're going to fire up some ESPN mock drafts shortly. So stay tuned. Thank you guys so much for your time. Enjoy the rest of your evening. Peace.